What's going on, Salt Strong Nation? We're about to talk about my favorite topic, which is springtime trout. This is the time of year that trout are at their largest size. They're very apt to eat really anything you can throw in front of their face, but there are some baits that will produce bigger fish and more fish if you work them properly. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my top 3 lures to use for spring trout fishing and even throw in a bonus one for you guys. But we're going to dive right in here, go over all the different ways to work them, the different types of presentations you're going to want to use, and when to use each of them. So starting off, my number one choice, I'll cut right to the chase, is a big paddle tail. Now, in the springtime, we preach a lot that you don't want to use big baits. Trout are the exception because they are always looking for high-calorie meals. While there is not a ton of big bait fish on the flats, there are going to be some large mullet, and that's one of the first things that I look for when I'm after big trout in the spring is mullet that are jumping around, that are running from predators, because they are a very easy way to spot where those big trout are going to be. Usually you can cover a lot of ground really quickly with these paddle tails and dial in on exactly where those fish are. I like to throw these on 1/4 ounce jig heads or 3/16 ounce jig heads in the spring because usually those fish are not up in the very shallowest parts of the flats. They're usually in 3 to 5 feet of water, right on the drop-offs of the flats, right where there's some sort of structure on a depth change. So usually what I'm going to do is really feel around with the straight retrieves or jig over some ledges with these paddle tails, and I find a lot of fish doing that, especially on the drop. I find most of my large fish taking me up on this presentation. As that paddle tail is going down, it's got a nice wag of the tail, and those trout jump right up from below. They're an ambush predator. Their jaw hinges upwards, so they're designed to come up from the bottom and attack that prey. So swimming it over that ledge or jigging it over that ledge, as it drops down, those trout are all over it. So again, number one choice is going to be a paddle tail. So next up is going to be some form of stick bait. Now, when those fish are not wanting anything that's got a whole lot of vibration to it, they're really spooky. In the springtime, there are some adverse weather conditions that can make fish really wary of things that are going on. There starts to be light winds and it starts to warm up. They'll slide up shallow, and trout with a very exposed lateral line, unlike redfish, they both have the same lateral line, but there's a much thicker skin density on those redfish. Trout have very exposed lateral lines. They're very aware of what's going on around them, which is why most times you can't sneak up on them with a trolling motor, or if you're splashing around, bouncing around on the boat. They're very hard fish to kind of get up on. So during those conditions, a lot of times you'll see paddle tails will scare them off as well. Again, too much commotion in the water. So what I like to use is a stick bait instead, and there's really 2 big presentations for that. That's going to be some sort of shrimp presentation or some sort of split-tailed jerkbait presentation. And the reason I'm calling these stick baits is, again, they don't have any kind of vibration to the tail, but they dart around in the water. And we know that trout are really keyed in on erratic actions. They're an ambush predator that's not really dialed in to chasing things down long distances, which is why even with the paddle tails, I don't recommend swimming them constantly for those trout. I recommend jigging or allowing them to drop after a short constant retrieve, because the drop is really what triggers those strikes. What's nice about a lot of these jerk baits is that they have that great darting action, and as you take that pause, it sinks right back down to the bottom. So a lot of times what I'll do if I'm working those trout that are on the edge of a channel, a really deep channel like the one you're seeing in the video right now, what I'll do is allow that bait to drop right off that channel, give it a couple pops, and let it sink down to the bottom right along that ledge. And we'll find a lot of fish that'll come and pick it up right there. And if I'm up in the shallow flats, like I mentioned, where those fish are very aware of what's going on around them, that's when I switch to the split-tail jerkbait. It's a mainly sight-focused presentation because there is no vibration to it. It's just something that they see darting around, and they see it's an easy target as it bounces over a pothole. It's one of my favorite ways to target trout up in really shallow, clear water grass flats. I cannot say enough about those split-tail jerkbaits. They're an absolute killer when the paddle tails are scaring these fish off. So think about those 2 presentations and when to use each of them. Again, I do like the shrimp presentation when it's a little bit deeper water. It just has a great bounce to it, but those split-tail jerkbaits work a little bit better in the shallower flats. But regardless, you're going to want to have a stick bait in your box when you're targeting big spring trout. Now, last but not least, topwater. This is my favorite time of year to target trout on topwater because they're, again, so apt to get up and get after fish. And as they do start to slide up shallower, they do start to attack some of those larger bait fish later on in the spring when they show up. You're going to have some amazing success on topwater. Our new Moonwalker was actually designed with larger rattles in the back that I prefer for big trout. They've got a little bit of a lower frequency to them, which imitates a bigger mullet flicking its tail. You're going to want to make sure you pick a topwater that's got a really good loud rattle to it, that sounds like a fish that's working along the top, and that has a good darting motion to it. Again, we know Predators like trout are very sight focused on something that's moving and splashing and looks like it's injured. So as that bait fish walks, that little walk the dog action, and it's got that nice rattle to it, as it walks over their head, again, they're designed to feed from below upward. Their jaw hinges up, so they come up and they smack it. This is one of my favorite ways to catch trout. Again, maybe not the best way to get a lot of numbers. Quality-wise, I catch some of my best trout on Topwater. I can't recommend. If you guys are new into targeting big trout, this is probably the easiest way to do it. In terms of numbers, it can be a little tough because trout are known for taking several pops at Topwaters. And one quick tip for you guys, if you're getting hit on a lot of strikes, don't stop the lure and wait for the fish to come hit it. You want to keep walking that topwater because it's going to continue to follow behind it. And if you stop it, it's going to keep tracking and looking for it. And if that topwater is not moving, it's likely going to pass right by it. So while I do love topwaters, I will say they're great for getting big fish to bite, especially the largest fish out of the group when they're really competitive. They're not the best numbers bait because it can be a little tough to get them to actually connect on the topwaters. But nonetheless, you definitely want to have one in the box because it's probably the most fun way to catch big trout in the spring. All right, so there's the top three, but I did say I'd give you one more bonus lure, and that's going to be a slow sinking twitch bait. Now, the reason I didn't include this in the top three is because it doesn't necessarily have a specific time you're going to want to use it. It's really an ace up the sleeve type lure because I will probably use all three of the other lures that I've mentioned before I break this one out. But the cool thing about this is it has the properties of every one of the other three lures I mentioned. It walks the dog like a topwater. It's very erratic like a stick bait. It's got a big bait fish presentation like a paddle tail. But the biggest problem with it is it's very difficult to fish and learn the sink rates, and it doesn't cover ground super fast. So you have to know that you're in fish, and you have to know that they haven't really been interested in your other presentations. But this has been a great ace up my sleeve when I'm having a tough time getting fish to bite. I will use these soft dine XLs earlier in the spring when the fish are dialed in on a slightly smaller bait, but I will upgrade to those Fat Boy Corkies later on in the spring that offer a little bit larger of a presentation when that bait fish size starts to kind of move up, when we see a little bit bigger mullet, a little bit bigger shad, a little bigger pinfish on the flats. So definitely have one of these in your box as well, but I would recommend throwing the other three first before you get into this one. This is a time-tested big trout lure, but it's a little bit more difficult to work than the others, and I would recommend mastering them first. So that's going to wrap it up, guys. Those are my top lures to use for big trout in the spring. Now, if you want to pick up any of the lures that I mentioned, the paddle tails, the stick baits, the top waters, even the slow sinking twitch baits, we do have them in the Salt Strong shop at 20% off for Salt Strong Insiders, so I definitely recommend you guys stock up for spring. It's going to be a great fishing season coming up. But if you want to see more awesome fishing information, this is just a small taste of the great stuff that we offer in the Insider Club, from on-the-water reports, discounts on tackle, and much, much more. Definitely join us in the Salt Strong Insider Club. And if you're new to Salt Strong, just know that we're the #1 online fishing club in America because we guarantee we're going to help you catch more fish, save money on lures and tackle, and make friends fast, or it's free. So come join us in the Salt Strong Insider Club soon, and thanks again for watching.